Good afternoon. The text that we will be dealing with today is the Silapathikaram, the Tale of an Anklet by Ilango Atikal. According to B. Mangalam, Tamil, amongst the Indian languages, is the foremost non-Sanskrit classical language that boasts of an uninterrupted continuity in its spoken and written, oral and literary usage and distinct tradition. The Tamil country was ruled by three kingdoms, Chora, Choza, Chera, and Pandya, known for their overseas trade with the Romans, and a huge corpus of poetry with more than 2,000 extant poems testifies to a period of literary composition or sangams and royal patronage. If you will look at the southern part of the map of India in the 5th century C, we find that the state of Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and some parts of Kerala were ruled by the three kingdoms mentioned, Chola, Pandya, and Chera here. You'll see the cursor right here. You'll see Pallava, Chola, Pandya, Cheral. These are the three kingdoms that ruled the southern part of India in 5th century C. This is the map for 5th century C. In the current map of India, if you locate them, these are these are Andhra Pradesh, some parts of Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. Before we begin with our induction to genre conventions that are epic and sangam, I would like to shed some light on the author, on the background of the author. Author Ilango Atikal. Tamil tradition ascribes the composition of the Silapathikaram to Ilango Atikal. He is considered to be the venerable ascetic prince. Now that we are referring to asceticism and literary compositions such as Silapathikaram, a brief note on songs of the saints of India. Ascetic saints and their songs, a literary form which finds its offshoot in the form of bhakti movement, is usually referred to as the family of bhakti, a word that means passionate love for God and implies a sense of close engagement with other people. The word bhakti is derived from a Sanskrit root meaning to share, and it points to the importance of relationship both to God and to human beings in the kind of form of God without any attributes. And coming to Ilango Atikal, he renounces material life for a spiritual. Why do I? Ilango Atikal, the younger brother of the Cheral king Chenukutuvan, recounts the tradition, the Canto 30 for Silapathikaram recounts the tradition that Ilango pronounced home and the world on hearing. The astrologer elder brother Chenukutuvan would succeed his father as the Cheral king. Ilango then leaves the palace and enters a Jaina monastery on the outskirts of Vanchi. There he takes the holy vows, thus renouncing temporal authority in favor of the spiritual. In the recounter to have composed a secular classic, which is totally unlike a religious one, such as the. So we were talking about how Ilango renounces his material life for a spiritual quest. Now, there are many regarding Ilango, and one of Ilango is a late invasion. This is by Ganana Obhiri, questions Ilango's kinship with Chenukutuvan and considers this a late interpolation. Ilango is that he could possibly be a Jaina, that the eponymous author was Jaina. For Jaina ideas, crisscross Kovalance's spiritual guide through the forest separating the Chola and Pandya kingdom is an eloquent and persuasive apologist for Jainism in the Silapathikaram. And also the plot of the poem tethers to the Jaina doctrine of karma, that is Tirthana Kara Nama Karma, which means which can be elaborated on the idea of purity of deeds and duties. Coming to the next, the first genre convention that we were talking about in the second slide, in the third slide, epic. So coming to the genre convention of epic, the Silapati Karam shares few epic features with its Indo-European cousins, the Mahabharata and the Iliad. In the Sanskrit and Greek epics, the action is centered around events in the courts of kings and culminates in a great war. The action in the Tamil epic is focused on events in the life of two ordinary people from the influential merchant class that rose to prominence in the centuries following the end of the Mauryan Empire. Events that ultimately bring the protagonist into conflict with the Panthea king. War, therefore, is not central to the Tamil epic as it is to the Sanskrit and Greek. Um, Ilango rewrites the epic tradition by subverting its essential endocentric bias. He displaces the semi-divine warrior and the heroic ethos that surrounds him with a mortal woman who is transformed into a divinity. Ilango's work is unmistakably revisionary. It does not imitate the Sanskrit epic, prestigious though that is. It builds upon forms indigenous to Tamil, which it perfects. As a female protagonist, Kannagi disrupts the epic structure and calls its presumptions into question. The hero in the Indo-European epic is usually semi-divine. Yudhishthira's father is Dharma, the god of justice, and his mother Kunti is a Yadava princess. Achilles' mother is Thetis, and his father is Peleus, king of Thessaly. In the Tamil epic, the protagonist is invariably human. Kannaki is born into a noble merchant family of Puhar, but changes into a goddess in the course of the epic. uh, Resemblances between Silapati Karam and the other epics. Till now, we were discussing the differences. Function of the epic was originally, as Albert Lord reminds us, magical and ritual. It was performed to ward off evil. Only when the function became obscured or was forgotten did the epic come to be looked upon as entertainment. The apotheosis of Kannaki into the goddess Patini confirms the sacred character of the Silapati Karam. The Indian epics are sacred texts exemplifying and promoting the four great ends of human, that is, duty, wealth, desire, and liberation, through the characters as they evolve in the course of the story. The poet, protagonist, and audience participate equally in the regeneration of the human spirit. The poet is never primarily an entertainer, but essentially a guide who offers enlightenment beyond the local social and political knowledge. The vision ultimately shapes the generic characteristics recognizable in every epic poem. The epic attempts to narrate this regeneration dramatically in terms of a sequence of onset, conflict, reversal, and denouement. Events are carefully selected as emblems of spiritual dilemmas. This action is circular in that fifth century, in that the protagonists find their way back to themselves after a series of humiliations and ascend to an enlightenment beyond time. Thus, the Indian and Greek worldviews are fundamentally the last point. There are differences between the Sanskritic and European epic traditions too. The differences are the Indian and Greek worldviews are fundamentally different. Faced with the inevitability of death, the Indian mind turns to metaphysical reflection, while the Greek mind engages itself with life more fully and urgently. Coming to Ilango Atikal's poetics. Tamil poetics speaks of two kinds of love, premarital love and marital, that is Kalavu, and extramarital love, that is Karpu. Uh, the Book of Puhar, Ilanko consciously uses four of the seven Akamtinais to organize and enrich the narrative in the Book of Puhar. Mulai, the patient endurance of a woman during the time of separation from the lover. Muruttam, the infidelity of lovers. Natal, the anxiety caused by separation. And Palai, elopement and separation from the family. Akam themes overlap these thinais and further indicate Ilanko's dependence on the conventions of erotic poetry. Each of the four thinais used in the Book of Puhar has a strong undercurrent of erotic themes that throw light on the events of the narrative and give it a structural unity. We shall now identify some of the themes under the four thinais as they occur in Canto 7. Patience, endurance during the time of separation. For say, Kovalan leaves his wife Kanaki for the courtesan Madhavi. The infidelity of lovers. Lovers quarrel. Both Kovalan and Madhavi upset each other of infidelity. The anxiety caused by separation. Nathal. A woman's constant thought of for her lover, consumed by her love of Kovalan and separated from him. Madhavi pours her heart out in the letter to him. Elopement and separation from the family, Palai, interspersed with six of the seven Puram Thinais, one due to taking over the land of once his enemies. Ulinai, the sea for a city, Tumpai, Pisht battle, Bhakti, as a prelude, and praising a warrior's fame and munificence. The book of Mathura, the Silapati Karam, like the Mahabharata, journey through a forest that signifies journey through liminality, through communities that are not fully social. Henrik Zimmer notes that, in contrast to the forest or that is why is to be dedicated to the god. Uh, to Mathura, it is in liminal to post-liminal word term. The forest represents a descent to unknown, and the Jaina and Kannagi as the spiritual life that karma is inexorable and that each must follow his own path. This is repeat. They meet in Srikana, Srinakara. Books for Kannaki's even seed in thirsting Kannaki role as a patient and submissive life. It's the role of a goddess in the Indian classical dramaturgy, and its conviction in the Silapati Karam. The Silapati Karam is a poem with songs blended with prose as a prologue informs us. So these are the five thinais that we were discussing about in this slide. In the previous slide here, the five thinais that was mentioned during discussing the book of Puhar, Vanchi and Mathura. A short I begin with genre convention. I would like to give a short note on Silapati Karam and what is genre. Put on in the ancient Tamil country. The first Sangam, according to tradition, had more than 4,000 member boards and held sway in Sangam with more than 3,500 ports. Number of years, the works of available to us is Sangam for nearly 2,000 years with evidence of around 5 thinais that I would elaborate in the slide that is being discussed. But the where is it? Um, um, is a treatise on is a grammatical treatise that talks about the the Sangam tradition and its attributes. So, according to Tholakapiyam, poetry subject matter is characterized under two heads, that is Akam and Puram. Akam stands for the interior, the inner, the individual, and the various phases of love. Puram stands for the exterior, the outer, the world, war, heroic, valor, or simply the non Akam. So, Akam stands for love, and Puram stands for heroic. Akam and Puram domains thus encapsulate the entire gamut of human experience in historical time and place. Akam poems depict various phases of and situations in love. Women's voice are predominantly heard, though they remain anonymous. In fact, in Akam poetry, speakers are identified only by their relationship. Tholakapiyam locates the contents of poetry in terms of mutual. The first theme, which are place and time of Karu, the seed theme that indicates the relationship between human beings and the world, society at large, and Yuri, the essential theme that reflects the various phases of love or war. Scholars like Ramanujan have termed mutual first element, Karu native element, and Yuri human element. The seed theme includes men and women, their occupation, animals, birds, trees, flower, musical instruments, and so on. It is the mutual, the first theme of place and time that ushers in the distinctive character of Tamil poetics. What we term place is notified as Thinai. There are 7 Thinais, each in Akam and Puram, but two of them in both the domains are considered inappropriate for depiction in poetry. In essence, 5 Thinais in the Akam domain are named after flowers, trees, as listed below. So these are the 5 Thinais of Akam. Kurinci, Conehead, Hills, Phase of Love is clandestine meeting of lovers, Mulai, Jasmine, Pastures, Waiting in Hope, Marutam, Arjuna Tree, Countryside, Wives is Sulking, Infidelity of Man, Natal, Dark Lily, Seashore, Lamenting, Anxiety for Husband's Return, Palai, Ivory Wood, Wasteland, Parting Lovers, Departure in Search of Wealth or Knowledge. So the two Thinais mentioned here that was considered to be inappropriate are Kilai, Unrequited Love, and Perun Thinai, Mismatched Love. Uh, Coming to the Puram poetry, the Puram poetry was also codified by 7 Thinais. 6 of them named after flowers and trees are here. Um, Vetsi, Scarlet Ixora, Cattle Rating, Vansi, Indian Willow, Invasion, Ulinai, Balloon Wine, Sea, Thumpai, Thumpai, Death, Victory, Kanchi, Impermanence of life, pattern, not the practice for the praise of king. Several poems in Purana of kings at battlefields and reflect a lively bonding between the poet and the patron king. That is life, impermanence of earthly glory, and a leveling of king, deciphering a Thinai and thereby grasping the encoded in Atikal's joy in identifying a raga and figuring out the possible kriti based on the Ilango employs the convention of looking ahead descriptive poems of Patu Patu. Ilango's work combines prose, verse, version of Tamil life, its myth, legends, its attainment in music, dance, varied musical instruments, communities inhabited city where Manulapati Karam comes close to the Western conceptualization, indigenous module form, structure, characterization, and narrative. There are 5 in Tamil: Silapati Karam, Menimikalai, Valayamalake. Silapati Karam and are termed the twin epics as spiritual trials of the daughter of Kovalan and Madhavi. Madhavi as protagonist of Silapati. The young girl renounces world pleasure and chooses to be a Buddhist nun. The four goals of human life, duty, dharma, wealth, desire, and liberation, are exemplified. Silapati depicts the first three goals, that is duty, dharma, wealth, and desire. Although, but the last of the four goals is depicted is further elaborated, and the two also sustained are invariably interlinked and studied together. The idea of Tamil poetry, music, and dance operates in Tamil. They refer to the Silapatikaram follows what could be termed a poetic sequence that real poetry, music, and interspersed with prose. It is thus a unique and narratorial style are evidently different. Class epic. So epic of Silapatikaram is a useful literature each time applied with an awareness of the inherent with its Western and Sanskritic grammatical tradition has termed Silapatikaram as Kaporul Nilai Seyul. Toda Nilai Seyul implies a long proportion with inter. Previous slides, we have discussed the genre conventions, both epic and sangam, and also what genre convention is, what does it signify for Silapati Karam, and the five thinais of Akam, seven thinais of Puram. Coming directly, now that we have got an induction into the historical background of the epic, with the information about the author and what all important genre conventions are in the epic that need to be looked into. Along with it, the Sangam and its tradition. I would like to come to the tale of an anklet. Puhar, a flourishing seaport and the Chola capital. This is the first book, Canto 1 to 10. Bharat received, and the story is in a festive mood as it celebrates Villain Kannaki, who belong to full dotes on her. Madhavi, a courtesan, is honored by the Chola king in recognition of her talent as a dancer. He presents her with a garland and 1,008 pieces of gold. Madhavi turned up for sale through her maid Vansata Malay, who announces that her mistress will marry Kannaki and sin with Madhavi, abandoned by Kovalan Kannaki. It is spring and Puhar celebrates the festival of Indra, the king of the gods. But in the revels, join the revelers and on the seashore. Madhavi takes up her lute out and he sings one song after another about a lovely woman who hurts her lover. Madhavi has hastily assumes that Kovalan is no longer interested in her. She takes the lute from him and sings about a woman betrayed in love. Kovalan too thinks that she is in love with someone else and leaves her at once. Madhavi returns home with an empty heart. She writes Kovalan a touching letter to coax him back, but he refuses the letter sent through her maid. In Kovalan's view, Madhavi's love for him was nothing but after all, he tells Vansita Malay Madhavi is only a dancing girl and he should have known better. Madhavi quite endures the agony of his loss. Meanwhile, Kannaki terrible dream in which she learns of walking. Soon Kovalan arrives and confession. Together they decide to leave for Madurai, the Pandya capital, to recoup their fortune with a pair of Kannaki's anklet. Since Kovalan has squandered all, early next morning, unbeknownst to their parents, they leave Puhar. On the way, they are joined Kavanti, a Jaina ascetic. This is the book 2, that is the book of Madurai. It has 13 cantos. With whom they travel to Urayur. The three journey south through the bleak forest separating the Chola and Pandya kingdoms. Kovalan and his two companions arrive on the banks of the uh, Vaiyai, overlooking the towers of Madurai. He leaves Kannaki in Kavanti's care and slips unnoticed into Madurai, past the Yavana guards to take in the sights of the city. When he returns to the grove where Kavanti is, the Brahmin Matalap informs him of the birth of Mani Mekalai, his daughter, by Madhavi. Kovalan tells the Brahmin of his dream in Puhar, in which he saw himself riding a horned buffalo, the mount of Yama, the king of the dead. Thinking that misfortune might strike him there, Kovalan explains he left for Madurai immediately. Kavanti entrusts Kannaki to the care of the herdswoman, Matari. Both Kovalan and Kannaki follow her to the herdspeople's quarter, where Kavanti remains behind in the grove outside the city. Kannaki, with the help of Matari's daughter Ai, um, prepares food and serves it to Kovalan. A deeply troubled Kovalan once again despises himself for the troubles he has brought on Kannagi and their parents, and confesses that he hadn't kept to the straight and narrow path. Kannaki, for the first and only time, reproaches him and speaks her heart out about the pain his indiscretion has caused her. After a tearful farewell, he leaves for the marketplace with one of her anklets, which he hopes to sell and put aside as capital. As he walks out, a humped bull appears before him, but he does not notice it. It, it is a bad omen. He sees the royal goldsmith and approaches him to estimate the price of the anklet. The goldsmith examines it and asks Kovalan to wait near his hut. The goldsmith hurries to the palace and reports to the king that he has caught the thief who had stolen the queen's anklet. The king is on his way to pacify the queen following a quarrel with her. He orders his guards to execute Kovalan and recover the anklet, thus bypassing the law and doing away with the trial in his anxiety to be reconciled to the queen. The king's guards follow the goldsmith to his hut. Struck by Kovalen's innocence, they hesitate to kill him, but the goldsmith lectures to them on the skill and cunning of thieves. Just then, one of the guards cuts Kovalan down with his sword. The goldsmith feels relieved that his crime will now remain a secret, for of course it is he who has stolen the queen's anklet. Matari notices inauspicious omens in the herdspeople's quarters and suspects that some evil is about to happen. To ward off any calamity, and she arranges for a round dance enacting incidents from the life of the god Krishna to be performed in his praise. But the dance is over. Matari walks down to the river Vaiyai to bathe. There, she hears about Kovalen's murder, but does not have the heart to tell Kannaki. Instead, a stranger breaks the news to Kannaki that Kovalan has been killed by King's guards on the charge of theft. Kannaki is beside herself with grief and denounces the Panthea king Netun Chelian. The people of Madurai condemn their king for his injustice. Kannaki finds her husband in a pool of blood and embraces him. It appears to her that he rises on his feet, wipes the tears from her eyes, and ascends to heaven, telling her to live in peace. Kannaki rushes to the palace to demand an explanation from the king. The queen sees inauspicious omen in a dream and is telling the king about them when Kannaki's cry rends the air, insisting on an audience with him. Anklet in hand, she charges the king with the murder of her husband. The king defends himself, saying that it was his duty to kill a thief. Kannaki then breaks open her anklet and gems leap out, proving Kovalen's innocence, since the queen's anklet only contains pearls. Kannaki proves Kovalen's innocence. The king acknowledges his guilt and dies. The queen follows him. In a rage, Kannaki walks out of the palace. She curses Maturai, wrenches her left breast of her body, and hurls it over the city, which instantly goes up in flames. The tutelary deity of Maturai appears before Kannaki and consoles her. She tells her that Kovalan, in a former birth, was known as Bharata, While he was in the service of King Vasu, he mistook one San, Sankaman, a merchant, for a spy and beheaded him. Distraught beyond words, San, Sankanam Kaman, uh, Sankaman's wife Nili cursed Bharata as she jumped off a cliff. The deity tells Kannaki that in 14 days she will join her husband in heaven. Kannaki then leaves Madurai and travels west while till she arrives at Nethuval hill in the Cheral country, from where she ascends to heaven in Indra's chariot. Both these incidents are really important because in the former slides we have talked about how Kovalan's karma comes to a full circle in the book of Maturai, and also the apotheosis of Kannaki and the liminal stage we talked about, and how from pre to it moves to the post liminal stage. So now the third book, the final book. The hill dwellers witness Kannaki's ascension. They meet the Cheral king Chenakuttavan camping on the banks of the Periyar and report to him what they had seen. The poet Katan is also there, and he relates to the king the unhappy tale of the events that had occurred in Madurai. Queen Ilango tells the king that Kannaki should be worshipped as a goddess. Chenakuttavan decides to install a memorial stone for Kannaki taken from the Himalaya and inscribed with her image. He prepares to march to northern India to obtain the stone and also vows to the Tamil kings. He defeats them in a pitched battle. He engraves the image of Kannaki as the goddess Patini on the stone brought from the Himalayas and has it illustrated in the river Ganga. The Brahmin Matalan arrives in the king's camp and informs him that both Kavanti and Matari have taken their lives to atone for their failure to protect Kannaki, and that Matavi has entered a Buddhist nunnery and taken the holy vows. Chenakuttavan then returns home to his capital Vanchi. He installs the image of Patani in a temple, dedicates it, and orders the daily worship of the goddess. On the advice of Matalan, he performs the Rajasuya, the royal sacrifice, as a mark of his undisputed sovereignty and establishes himself as the universal emperor of the Tamil country. He endows the temple of Patani and offers worship in the host of kings, including Gajabahu of Lanka. The goddess herself blesses the occasion. Now that we are talking about how the whole cycle of karma has come to a balance in the last two sections of the Silapati Karam, it would be interesting to understand the Jaina philosophy of thought that is said to have influenced the epic, the Silapati Karam. Kannaki's apotheosis is foretold by the goddess Mathurapati in Canto 23, where she explains to her the circumstances surrounding Kovalan's unexpected death. In a former birth, Kovalan, as one Bharata, had given up his vow of non-violence and murdered an innocent merchant, Sankaman, whom he had mistaken for a spy. Sankaman's wife, Nili, raped for 14 days. She cursed Kovalan and took her own life by jumping off a cliff. The reference to Bharata's vow of inviolence, a cardinal doctrine of Jainism and one which it carried further than either Hinduism or Buddhism, is one of the many indications that suggest that the Jaina provenance of the poem. A layman takes his vow in the presence of his teacher with the words, among others, "As long as I live, I will neither kill nor cause others to kill." The goddess attributes Kovalan's death to his karma, again, a law that the Jainas developed further than either the Hindus or the Buddhists. A Tamil scholar, Sneha Govindarajan, spent 18 years trying to identify the places mentioned in the Silapati Karam. He claims the Latevi temple of the Western Ghats, about 90 miles to the west of Madurai, is the temple of Patani, built by Chenakuttavan on the site of Kannaki's ascension. She visits the temple of Koravai and ceremoniously breaks her gold bracelet. Indian on the death of their husband break or remove the bangles on their wrist Kannaki then leaves Madurai forever. The lines are as follows. Along the bank march well into a ditch or climbed a slope she walked, step by painful step up the sacred hill of Nethual, who swirls the long in the shade of a grove of flowering kino trees. She cried, "Oh, I am a great sinner. Thus past days, Indra, Lord thought that day to be right for worship, praised the glorious name of this revered woman, rained unfading flowers upon her, and adored her in a heavenly chariot by the side of seen the royal city, Kannaki, her hair, thick as a forest, ascended to heaven. Govindarajan writes that Kannaki climbed the steep hill and fasted unto death under a Venkai tree. There is no reference to Kannaki's death by fasting either in the text or commentaries, but the idea is not improbable given the Jaina context of the poem. The Jaina nun Kavanti starves herself to death on hearing of Kovalan and Covalence faith, she was in fact their spiritual counselor and felt herself responsible for the unfortunate turn of events. Kavanti, as a devout Jaina, undertakes a ritual death by fasting, properly thinning out, quote unquote, enjoined on Jainas in special circumstances. Fasting is a way of spiritual purification. There are references to the practice of death by starvation. Um, and a king starves himself to death, facing the north to atone for his loss of face. Seraman restored to Vatakiruthal when he was wounded on the battlefield. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana furnish examples of the practice of death by starvation. In the Mahabharata, a king says, "Sinner that I am, I will sit here and dry up my body. Know that I have now entered death, in order that I may not be born in other births. A destroyer of family, I will not eat. I will not take water. I'll stay here and dry up my dear life." The king punishes himself for his sin and welcomes death as an explanation. Warriors in the Ramayana who have failed in their duty to the king do likewise. E. Washburn Hopkins remarks that those intending to die touch water and lie on holy dharba grass. In the grove of the kino trees on Nethual Hill, Kannaki confesses, "Oh, I am a great sinner." As a wife, she is only too conscious of the fact that she had failed to protect her husband. A vow to end her life by fasting or to undertake severe penances is not an improbable response under the circumstance. Even Matavi, who was no more than Covalence's paramour, on hearing of his death enters a Buddhist nunnery and takes the holy vows. Again, the god who is present at Kannaki's apotheosis is Indra. He comes down from heaven, rains unfading flowers upon her by way of adoration, and takes her to heaven in company of Kovalan. By the time of the poem, Indra had ceased to be an important god in the Hindu pantheon. He had become, on the other hand, the foremost god of the Jainas and Buddhists. The presence of Indra is therefore no fortuitous coincidence, but rather one more instance of the poem's Jaina orientation. Indra's importance in the poem is further attested by the description in Canto 5 and 6 of God's festival. The Silappatikaram offers further evidence of its Jaina ethos. The eponymous author of the poem is Ilango Atikal. And Atikal is a Jaina ascetic or is a Jaina ascetic who combines monastic life and outside religious activities. Kovalan uses the honorific when he addresses the nun Kavanti. We can infer that both Kovalan and Kannaki are Jainas from Kavanti's word. "Oh, you have good features, a noble family, impeccable conduct, and observe the proper austerities enjoined." The holy words of the Arhat. The term arhat from the verbal root ar, to be worthy, means worthy of worship and is used for a Jaina or Buddhist sage who has reached the stage of enlightenment. Kavanti herself is on her way to to Madurai to worship the Arhat there. On reaching the outskirts of that city, Kavanti entrusts Kannaki, who accompanies her along with Kovalan to the care of herdswoman Matari. The later tells her daughter Ai, uh, since he is a pious Jaina householder, let us have new vessels that Kannaki needs to make his lunch with the help of her husband's sister. There are references to an elevated stone platform built by Jaina households of Puhar for Arhats to reach Dharma from, or Karanas, whom uh, Kamin, Kaminathiyar identifies as Jaina or Buddhist mendicants, to the five holy letters. Ilango introduces the Jaina doctrine of karma as structural element in the narrative. Kovalan's death is attributed to the karma of the former birth, and Kannaki's tragedy to her failure to keep a vow on Kovalan's behalf in a former birth. An explanation such as this diffuses the focus of the poem by subjecting characters to a force outside themselves and over which they have no control. The law of karma functions as a dominant motive in the poem. This is borne out by many references to it. His karma is, I, I quote, for example, I quote, his karma now appeared and found an excuse in the music of the lute. He took his caressing hands of her. The poem's bias in favor of Jainism shows itself in Kavanti's response to the Brahmin Matalan council to Kovalan. On their way to Madurai, Matalan urges ablutions in three holy lakes in order to know Indra's grammar and one's karmas from former birth, and to acquire the power to fulfill all one's wishes. In reply, Kavanti tells Matalan that the Jaina Agamas contain everything he has spoken about. On this friendly note, they part company. The interpolation of the myths relating to Krishna clearly indicate the extent to which Tamil worldview had by the 5th century been Sanskritized. It offers evidence of the worship of Krishna in the Tamil country that was to find its noblest expression in the hymns of Alvars, the Vaishnava Bhakti poets. This aspect of Krishna's story, Krishna as Gopala, is first told in Harivamsa and where the gods' acts are regarded as play, Leela. The Gopala literature culminates in the Bhagavata Purana, the spiritual fountain head of the worship of. The myth also illustrates the ideal of Vairagyan, freedom from desire, that releases one from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Because of the attachment to Kannaki, all three women were reborn. The poem is explicit on this point, once again seizes the opportunity to underscore the doctrine of karma. In this instance, he uses a Hindu myth to do so. It is not uncommon that people who do good enter heaven, and that people who are attached to things of this earth are reborn. While the apotheosis of Kannaki is the primary myth in the poem, is not averse to exploring the myths of orthodox religions. The myth of Gopala Krishna is Sanskritic and originates in the great tradition. The myth of Katan is Tamil and has its roots in the little tradition of village India. Despite the Jaina bias of the poem, Ilango is not an apologist for Jainism. He is fair in his presentation of the Hindu world. We discussed the Sangam, we discussed the heroic and the epic tradition. We have discussed the plot line for the Silapati Karam and along with it, the important elements to look into. Um, I would be summarizing the session with an essay by Dr. Chidambaranatha Chetiyar, titled Silapati Karam, the earliest Tamil epic. The important points to keep in mind from this writing is this exposition is an epic has been defined as a narrative of length dealing with events of importance and grandeur. Its events and persons stimulate us because they enhance our faith in the worth of man's achievement and his nobility and dignity. Though Silapatikaram consists of not more than 5,000 lines of poetry, only half in length of Virgil's Aeneid, it is nevertheless a long poem and celebrates the achievements of Kannaki and of a Pandya and a Chera king who are to be regarded as the other heroes of the poem. The second point to be kept in mind is Kannaki stands preeminent because the guardian angel of Madurai city treads before her with faltering steps, waits long to gain access to her, and cajoles her into giving a hearing. The celestials, under the lead of Indra descend from heaven, appear before her, show her her dead husband in flesh and blood, and then escort her to heaven. She reappears after reaching heaven to bless the Chera king, Chenakuttavan, who had consecrated a temple in her honor. She also forgives and blesses the royal dynasty of the Pandya who had wronged her. In these achievements of hers, the poet Ilango expresses the significance of human achievements. The third point is the Pandya king, whose ideals of kingly honor and justice are so high that he actually collapses and dies on finding that he has been the instrument of a miscarriage of justice, deserves to be regarded as a hero of the epic, even though his personal courage and prowess do not figure in the story. If a hero should surpass others in strength and courage, we find such a hero in Chenakuttavan, the Chera king, mentioned in the last book of the epic, the book of Vanchi, has the valor of Achilles. Several are the battles he has already won. To the question whether Silapatikaram is an oral or written epic, the answer is that it is largely written and only partially oral. A large number of verses in Kanalavari, for instance, were probably a part of oral composition already existing, which sung to be the accompaniment of the musical instrument. Yal was familiar to many. The verses, however, in Achiyar Kuravai and Kunara Kuravai, etc., are obviously the poet's own compositions and not collections of separate lays already existing. Ilango had a rich supply of stories, an important source of material for an epic poet. Witness, for instance, the stories of Nala and Damayanti in Canto 14, Rama and Sita in Canto 14, Devasura war, Mahabharata war, etc. in Canto 26, of the Brahmin who hid the treasure trove in Canto 21, of the Pandya who chopped off his right hand in Canto 23, of the thieves who bolted away in Canto 26, in Canto 16, of the monkey that was grateful in Canto 15, of the Brahmin lady who killed a mongoose in Canto 15. Of the seven chaste women of Puhar who wrought miracles in Canto 21. These stories and episodes can be detached and enjoyed by themselves. Silapatikaram appeals by its fine poetical texture, by its choice of apt and significant words, phrases, and lines, the pauses and the stops, the plays and counterplay of the words found in Canto 18 have a subtle effect of their own, which does not perhaps become evident until the second or subsequent reading. The wavering rhythms in which the poet couches the passages breaking the news of Kovalin's murder are also remarkable. Silapatikaram is a Tamil epic composed in the 2nd century AD and partakes of the characteristics of the Homeric epic in some respects and the Virgilian epic in some others. So we'll be talking about the similarities between the Homeric and the Virgilian elements and Silapatikaram. Uh, for Homeric elements in Silapatikaram, the first element is the straight and simple way in which Kovalan confesses his faults, shortcomings, and misdeeds in the presence of his wife is comparable to Homer. Just as Homer's characters keep to regular forms of address, Ilango's courtiers, ministers, ambassadors, and commanders adhere to the regular forms appropriate in the presence of the king. In another respect, also Silapatikaram resembles the Homeric epic. Kannaki dies not for the honor of society, but for her own honor. True, she lives for others as she lives for herself. But then her husband is killed. She wants to join him in death and only postpones it till she vindicates his honor. The similarities between Silapatikaram and Virgilian epic. This Tamil epic partakes also of the characteristics of the Virgilian epic. One of the heroes, Chenakuttuvan, the Chera king, is prepared to die not for his personal glory but for the honor of his land. Ilanko's characters speak with variety. There are three dreams, one of Kannaki, another of Kovalan, and a third of Pandyan queen, and each has a variety of its own, both in conception and import. There are again two epistles, both sent by Madhavi to Kovalan. Ilanko's art lay in skillful variation of even repetitive themes. The incident relating to the death of the Pandyan king and queen has to be repeatedly told in different settings. The artifice of employing synonyms to take away the tedium is also found in Ilanko. Ilanko's style is ornate in places. A uniform clarity is not always aimed at by the poet, and some passages are intelligible only after repeated readings. Silapati Karam is Virgilian in character and in another respect also. It contains a wide sweep of history, philosophy, religion, and ethics. It contains accounts of relationship between the Chola, the Pandya, and the Chera kings of the Tamil country. Philosophy is conveyed through the characters Kavunti, Atikal, and Matalan. Kavunti, Adikal's essays, etc., say that it is not impossible for man to achieve anything under the sun if he is true unto himself and to the world, and if he loves his neighbors as he loves himself. Matalans exhorts King Chenakuttuvan to do acts of charity. And the quote from Matalan is, "Youth is evanescent, wealth rotates, the body is mortal." Religious references to Siva, Murugan, Vishnu, Kotavai, and Arga abound in the work. Ethical passages occur frequently, especially towards the end of the work. Do no harm to the others. Realize the existence of God. Honor those who are devoted to God. Hate falsehood. Avoid backbiting. Neither kill nor eat flesh. Give alms. Do penance. Never be grateful. Despise friendship with the wicked. Never resort to perjury. Follow the wise path. That the wise and the learned should forgive the unwise actions of misguided or ignorant people is brought out by the poet in his own imitable style in Canto 10. Yet another point of agreement between Ilanko and Virgil is the avoidance of two extremes of being either too conservative or too erratic in describing conjugal activities. Just as Virgil bears the stamp of Caesarean and Augustan age, Ilanko exemplifies a transitional stage in the development of the Tamil country. Ilanko's heroes again are partly Homeric and partly Virgilian. So for today's discussion on the Silapati Karam, an induction into the historical background of the author and the epic was given. We started with the kingdoms mentioned in the epic. Then we went to the genre convention of epic and Sangam, about the author, Ilango, Atikal, and how did he come about to write the epic, the Silapati Karam. Also, it is important in this slide to note the songs of the saints of India as they talk about the Bhakti movement that originated in South India. Coming to the next slide, we talk about the genre conviction of the epic. While we were talking about the genre conviction of the epic, to Ilango Atikal's poetics, and later on the genre convection of the Silapati Karam. By this, what do we mean by the genre convention that is there in the Silapati Karam? Then we moved on to discuss genre convention of the Sangam, the Tenais, Akam, Puram, Karu, Yuri, Mutual, and Tholakapiyam. The 5 Tenais of Akam, the 7 Tenais of Puram. Then we moved on to discuss the story, the important characters in which are Kovalan, Kannaki, Madhavi, Kavunti, the 3 kings, and how the whole plot is delineated. Then finally, we discussed the essay by Chidambara Natha Chettiar. With this, I would end the session and would like to begin the discussion. If you have any queries, please type it out in the Q&A section, and I would be happy to address them. So the predominant queries that I can see is related to the audio. I apologize for it. Could be the network issue. I'll look into it, and it will be resolved by the next session. There are no queries related to the text. So I will be sharing with you the reference material as I have shared before too. So you will not face any problem with the notes and what is being discussed in the session. Uh, if it is difficult for you to keep at pace with what I'm saying. Though it would be really, really nice to get in practice of taking down notes and trying to be attentive while I'm saying important points and the points that are mentioned in the slide. Uh, there is already a WhatsApp group for BA English Honors. Vidushi is the class rep for my sessions, so please contact her regarding that. There are three groups, in fact. So by Akam, instead of going to the slide, Muskan, Akam means love, and Puram means heroic. Um, and we see because Silapati Karam is an epic, so by the virtue of it, you'll see the elements of both Akam and Puram being there in the narrative. I hope my session was enriching and you are getting something out of it. In case of queries, I have shared my email ID with you. Please write down an email. And also in emergency, you can always WhatsApp me. Thank you. Sir, may I request to please end the session? So the books to buy are, I'll be sharing with you the PDFs of the material that I have. So it is the Penguin edition by Partha Sarthi. I'd share it with you. Along with it, the introduction by B. Mangalam is also really good. The essay I discussed with you. And the postscript of Parthasarathi is also really helpful in understanding Silapatikaram better. So these are the books that I would suggest buying. Are there any more questions? Also, you do not have all the cantos in your syllabus, so it is Canto 1, Canto 2, Canto 7 from the book of Puhar. Uh, uh, so we will be discussing all the 30 cantos. Um, Canto 30, Canto 19, 20, 21, 22 are from the book of 24 and 26 to 2 are Canto 30 and two more cantos before 26 and 23, I guess, are from 22 are the book of Vanchi. So you do not have all the cantos in your syllabus. Okay. So it is Canto 1 to 7 from the book of Puhar, which has 10 cantos in total. From the book of Maturai, which has 13 cantos in total, it is Canto 17, 19, 20, 21, and 22. And from the last section, from the last book, from the book of Vanchi, We have Canto 24, 26, 30. Now that we have time, I can also share with you the Akam slide, and we can talk about um, the epic elements elements of epic in Silapati Karam. Yeah, so the genre convention that is Sangam, which expostulates on Akam and Puram. So the Akam poems have as their focus the individual within the matrix of familial relationship, foremost among them being love between man and woman, which is explored vertically, that is archetypically. The bias is impersonal. The experience itself is rarefied and frozen in the shape of a poem. The Puram poems, on the other hand, are centered outside the matrix of familial relationships and are occasional in character. So, the basic difference between the Akam and the Puram: Akam poems have their focus o- from on the within, right? So they are represented through love and motives like this, and the Puram poems, on the other hand, are centered on the outside. So the idea of war, heroism. Um, Women preside over the Akam poems, which are redolent of their ambience and sacred power. Premarital love and marital and extramarital love in all their phases are the subject of Akam poem, which includes the whole gamut of experience: meeting, waiting, sulking, lamenting, and perhaps parting. So this is about Akam. Um, we can also look into the elements of epic that are there. The genre convention of epic. The beginning, we see that in the epic, the Silapati Karam, the beginning, a song in praise of God, invocation, as was also seen in Sakuntala, right? The benediction. And an introduction to the subject. These are the three ways of beginning a great narrative poem. The Silapati Karam begins with verses in the praise of sun, moon, rain, and the city of Puhar. Um, the second epic element found in Silapati Karam is the four ends are exemplified in the great narrative poem. The Silapati Karam deals with the three of the four ends: duty, wealth, desire, as we had also discussed before. Manimikalai, which is the twin epic, is the story of Silapati Karam, deals with the last mode, that is liberation. Characterization of the hero and heroine. Kovalan and Kannaki are depicted as idealized types rather than individuals. This is keeping with the conventions of the great narrative poems. Um, Descriptions of the mountains, the sea, land, city, etc. It is part of the Tamil narrative tradition to begin with utopian descriptions of the land, river, or city. This practice goes back to the concept of the five thinais in classical poetry. One of the elements of the thinai in the landscape or region. Through an overlap of or fusion, the five landscapes are collapsed into one ideal region, overflowing with abundance. Thus, the description of Puhar, Mathura, and Vanchi in the Silapati Karam are utopian. We have to keep this in mind. So, consummation of the marriage, we see that there is a reference to copulating snakes in Canto 2. So, in the epic tradition, we see epics seem to begin with some evil or malfestation. So, similarly, does Silapati Karam. Uh, the other elements, the other two final elements of epic tradition in Silapati Karam are invasions, battles, and victories, uh, and moods and emotions. By moods and emotions, what do I mean is Silapati Karam shows no evidence of being written with the theory of rasa. This suggestion of mood in mind, no one dominant mood pervades the entire poem. Love in union and separation is the mood of the book of Puhar, while heroism is the mood of the book of Vanchi. In fact, they correspond to the Akam and Puram genre. The Silapati Karam is, however, reticent in describing the love and union of Kovalan and Madhavi. Yes, you will be provided with notes in the WhatsApp group. I have done that before too. People who have joined in late might not know about it. But you can contact Vidushi regarding it. She would forward the material sent to you. Why do I teach as if I'm stressed so much? Because I have a lot to read, and I continuously feel that I hope you guys are getting what I teach, and you are taking down notes. So this is one of my primary concern. I hope the students are taking down notes and are understanding the important points I'm saying, and I hope it is not just going over their head. So that is why I'm stressed. If there are any more queries, I'll be sharing the PPT with you, Anjali, with the whole batch in the WhatsApp that has been formed. Is there anything you would like me to go back to and talk about, or any queries that you have? There is this interesting essay that I have that is provided to me by Dr. Nalini Prabhakar. Reading, it would be nice to read it for better understanding of the Silapati Karam. I can read it out for you guys. So the important points to look in this essay that is titled Silapati Karam. The Silapati Karam is a Tamil epic that is speculated to have been composed around 4th to 6th century AD. It is said that the Dravidian languages, Tamil, has maintained the greatest of purity and has preserved some of its original literature. Um, this was also addressed earlier in the second slide, in fact, as was said by B. Mangalam. Um, of what are called the great poems or the five major poetical works in Tamil, only the text of Silapati Karam and two others survived. The author, Prince Ilango Atikal, was the supposed brother of King Chenakuttuvan, who appears later in the story, although no other Tamil poems mentioned that the king had a brother. We did talk about what Ganganath has to say on Ilanko's ancestry as the late, quote unquote, interpolation. So the Silapatikaram begins in the city of Puhar, as was discussed, in the kingdom of Chola, a bustling trading town in which Kannada and she knew that both Kovalin's parents and her own looked to her to maintain the traditions and honor of her family, thereby illustrating her devotion to her role as a wife. This role involved learning her duties as a partner and homemaker for her mother in law, then implementing her skills in a way to make home life harmonious for Kovalin and herself. Years later, a dancer named Madhavi captures Kovalin's eyes, so Kovalan starts another life with this woman, even having a child with her, all the while neglecting Kannagi. So in the first book, we see that there is a love triangle. To put it in simpler terms, so we see that Kannagi and Kovalan get married. Kannagi and Kovalan get married, and then there's this other woman who is a courtesan, a dancer, earns her own living, who falls in love with Kovalan, and Kovalan also falls in love with her. And you know, now they pursue a relationship, and Kovalan starts to neglect Kannagi. This goes on for a while. Kannagi gets to know of the extramarital affair that Kovalan is having, and in the book of Madurai, we see that Kovalan, having lost all his infatuation for Matali, the woman, the courtesan, um, decides to leave the city of Puhar for Madurai with Kannagi, and there, because Kovalan has spent all his money, they decide to sell the anklet, one of the anklet of Kannagi's. Now this anklet, while Kovalan goes to the goldsmith and gives the anklet, the goldsmith who knows about Queen's anklet being stolen by somebody takes Kovalan for a thief, and decides to report it to the king. So now the king, when he gets to know of it, has to um, quote unquote follow his Raj Dharma. He decides to punish the person who has committed the crime. Right. So it is interesting to see how on the how this epic functions on the dual mode of having um, a a circle uh, that is on the periphery of a particular pivotal idea and this circle is really important for the whole play to be intricately interwoven in a thread, right? So and the circle is this idea of shunya is extremely important for this epic also because you see how the Kovalan who was punished for not because he was not the thief actually. It was Kannaki's anklet, as we get to know later on, because Queen's anklet only had pearls, right? So he because he had committed a crime in his previous birth, he had to now repent for it, right? So this idea of cyclical karmic structure of time and how human beings in their effervescent paltry existence are a part of it um, as nothing but mere earthly beings who are mortals, right? So it is interesting how these dual school of thought processes are combined together by Ilango Atikal and have been and are visible in his. It is not a girl that I send notes to, Natasha. It is the girl who has actually helped in getting you all in the WhatsApp group. So I think she's also sharing the link with you in Teams. If you'll check, or I can drop. Okay, so she can be with. Um, if you guys can drop me a text on Meets, on Teams, I'll share the WhatsApp invite with you. So now there are also different opinions regarding how this work has a Jaina bias and the idea of purity of deeds and purity of um, deeds as well as purity of you know sanctity of um, penance, sacrifice, and suffering uh, is um, belonging to this particular school of thought. So, yeah. Thinais are really interesting to read and to understand how they function and what they represent, right? So, if you are going to look into the Thinais that were discussed today, so the five thinais of Akam. So if you look at it, that Kurunchi is the name for it, and how the cone head, the flower that represents the tree that represents it is the cone head, and the region is hill. And the phase of love that would be described by this setting is clandestine meeting of lovers. Mulai, that is jasmine. The region is pastures, and it signifies waiting in hope. Marutam, Arjuna tree is the region would be countryside, and it is the phase of love is vice is sulking infidelity of man. Natal is dark, symbolized to dark lily. The region is seashore, lamenting anxiety for husband's return. And Palai, ivory wood, a wasteland. The region is wasteland, and the phase of love is parting lovers' departure in search of wealth or knowledge. Right. So the seventh thinais of Puramar Vechi, Scarlet Axor. So it is the situation is cattle raiding, Vanchi's invasion, Yulinai is siege, Thumpai is pitched battle, Vakai is victory, Kanchi is impermanence of life, Patan is praise of king. So if you look at the situation and you look at the phases of if you'll not look at the word of love and just the faces here, and if you keep the instead of situation, if you have faces over here, you'll see the difference between the two, right? So that is why akam signifies love and the outside, which is signified through war, victory, things like this. I'll definitely be talking with the network provider and registering my complaint that there are network issue uh, with my modem or the setup that is provided. Also, with this, I end my live session. Hopefully, you guys will have a nice weekend. And in case of queries, please drop me a mail or a text. I'll be sharing with you the reference material. Thank you.